The ranger grabbed my wrist so hard I felt the bones shift. He wasn't looking at me when he did it. He was looking at the tree line. At the place where the afternoon light stopped, where the jungle swallowed everything past a certain invisible threshold and turned it into shadow and silence. "You do not go in there," he said. "Not after dark. Not for any reason." His name was Trung. He'd been a ranger in the Bujia Map Forest Preserve for 11 years. He had the kind of face that had seen bad weather and made peace with it. Calm. Weathered. The face of a man who was not easily frightened. He was frightened. "What happens if someone goes in after dark?" I asked. He finally looked at me. "They do not come back the same." He released my wrist. He walked back toward the ranger station without another word. He didn't explain what he meant. He didn't offer context. He just left me standing at the edge of the trees with the sun dropping behind the canopy, and the sound of something very large moving through the undergrowth about 40 meters to my left. I should have listened to him. I didn't. And now I'm sitting in a hotel room in Ho Chi Minh City with the door bolted, the lights on, and a journal that contains information I don't know what to do with. Information that 3 separate Vietnamese government officials have already told me, in very polite language, does not exist. My name is Daniel Reeves. I'm 31 years old. I'm a freelance documentary photographer from Portland, Oregon. And I need to tell you what happened in that jungle, because I don't think I'm going to be allowed to tell anyone else. Not after what I found. Not after what found me. Let me back up. I came to Vietnam in March of this year on assignment for a travel and conservation magazine. The assignment was straightforward: spend 2 weeks in the Central Highlands documenting the biodiversity of the protected forest preserves, file photos, write a companion essay, collect a check. I'd done a dozen jobs like it. The Philippines, Borneo, Papua New Guinea. Jungle work is my specialty. I know how to move through dense vegetation, how to stay quiet, how to avoid the mistakes that get photographers killed. Bujia Map National Park sits in Ben Phuc Province, right up against the Cambodian border. It's one of the last significant lowland tropical rainforest areas left in southern Vietnam. The park covers roughly 26,000 hectares. It has gibbons, sun bears, clouded leopards. It has trees that are older than the American Republic. It is, by every measure I was given before I arrived, a beautiful and professionally manageable location for a conservation photo essay. What the magazine's research team did not tell me, what the Vietnamese Tourist Authority did not tell me, was what was in the northern sector of the park. What they called, in hushed conversations I wasn't supposed to overhear, Khu Cam. The Forbidden Zone. I didn't know that phrase yet when I arrived. I didn't learn it until my 3rd day. I'm going to tell you about the first 2 days quickly, because they matter for context, and then I'm going to slow down considerably, because the things that happened after day 3 deserve to be told with precision. The ranger station was a concrete building about the size of a 2-car garage, painted institutional green, sitting on a cleared rise about a half-mile inside the main park entrance. There were 6 rangers stationed there on a rotating basis. 4 men, 2 women, all Vietnamese, all in their late 20s to mid-40s. Their supervisor was a man named Hong Van Min, a compact, serious-faced man in his 50s who spoke serviceable English and who had, based on the photographs on his desk, 3 daughters and what looked like a very happy life outside the jungle. Hong was friendly. All of them were friendly. They were accustomed to foreign researchers and photographers. They gave me a map, a laminated card with emergency radio frequencies, and a brief orientation about animal encounter protocols. Standard stuff. Stay on marked trails during active survey work. Carry your radio at all times. Check in at 0800 and 1800 every day. Do not approach wildlife directly. Do not leave the established sector grid. The established sector grid was the southern and central portions of the park. The northern sector, approximately 8,000 hectares of the most densely forested land on the preserve, was not on the map they gave me. I didn't notice that at first. I was focused on getting good shots. The first 2 days were genuinely beautiful. The light in that forest does something in the early morning that I've never seen anywhere else. It comes down through the canopy in these long diagonal shafts that make the whole forest floor look like the nave of a cathedral. I got some of the best nature photographs of my career in those first 48 hours. I was happy. I was relaxed. I had no idea. It was on the morning of day 3 that I noticed the northern sector wasn't on my map. I was eating breakfast at the ranger station, rice and something that might have been pork, and I had my map spread out on the table, planning the day's route. I was trying to triangulate a location one of the other rangers had described, a small waterfall about 4 kilometers northeast of the station. I had my compass, I had GPS on my phone, I had the map. The waterfall location, based on his directions, should have been in the northern sector. There was no northern sector on the map. The park boundary, as drawn on my map, ended well south of where his directions were pointing. There was just blank space. No trails, no contour lines, no topographical detail of any kind. Just the edge of the printed area and then white paper. I thought it was a printing error at first. I went and found the ranger who'd described the waterfall. His name was Bao, young guy, mid-20s, spoke English better than anyone else at the station, and I showed him the map. The waterfall, I said. It should be here, right? I pointed to the blank area. Something happened to Bao's face. It was subtle. You would have missed it if you weren't watching. The small muscles around his eyes tightened. The casual friendliness went behind a door. I think I make a mistake, he said. The waterfall is further south. Very small. Not worth the hike. You said it was spectacular. Small mistake. My English. I meant small waterfall. Not spectacular. He smiled. The smile did not reach the muscles around his eyes. Is that area accessible? I asked, pointing again to the blank space on the map. Research only, he said. Not permitted for visitors. What kind of research? Government. Forestry Ministry. You should ask Supervisor Hong. I found Hong in his office. I asked about the northern sector. He looked at my map for a moment, then set it gently on his desk. That area is a restricted conservation zone, he said. It has been under ecological study since 2009. No public access. What are they studying? Biodiversity surveys. Species cataloging. He folded his hands. Nothing that would be useful for your assignment, Mr. Reeves. The photogenic areas are all in the central sector. I promise you, you will find everything you need there. His manner was perfect. Measured and professional. He answered every question I had for the next 2 minutes with exactly the right level of detail. Not enough to invite follow-up, not so little as to raise suspicion. I thanked him and left. That night, I looked up Bajia map on my laptop. The park's Wikipedia page listed the northern sector as part of the protected area. A 2019 survey by a Vietnamese university biology department mentioned conducting fieldwork in the northern sector, gibbons, primarily, with no mention of restricted access. A 2021 paper, co-authored by a researcher from the Ho Chi Minh City University of Science, referenced significant fauna activity in the northern Bujia Map Forest Corridor, and recommended expanded study. The author of that paper was named Dr. Nguyen Thi Lan. She had a university faculty profile. She was listed as an associate professor of biology. Her profile said she was on extended research leave. It had said that since 2022. I told myself I was curious. I told myself it was the journalist in me, the instinct to pull on threads. I told myself a lot of things to justify what I did next. What I did next was walk north. Not that night. Not after Trung grabbed my wrist. That came later. On day 4, I simply walked north on the main trail until I found where it ended, and then I found where the undergrowth began, and I stood there for a long time looking at where one thing became another. There was a post. Old-looking. Metal. The kind of marker you use to delineate boundaries in conservation work. A steel post driven into the ground with a red stripe of reflective tape wrapped around the top. There was a sign in Vietnamese attached to the post. My translation app told me it said, "Restricted area? No entry. Ministry of Natural Resources and Environment." Below that, in smaller text, "Violations subject to prosecution under Decree 36/2020/NDCP." Below that, in even smaller text, handwritten in Vietnamese, someone had added something that wasn't official text. I photographed it and ran it through the app. "It knows you are standing here." I stared at that for a long time. Then I walked back to the station. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in my bunk in the visitor room of the ranger station and I listened to the jungle and I thought about that handwritten line. "It knows you are standing here." A warning? A joke? Some kind of local folklore someone had scrawled there as a prank? Or something else? At some point around 2 in the morning I heard voices outside. Low voices. Multiple people. I got up and looked out the window. Hong was standing by his truck with 2 men I hadn't seen before. They weren't in ranger uniforms. They wore dark clothing. One of them had what looked like a map or a printed document. They talked for about 4 minutes. Then the 2 men got in a second vehicle I hadn't noticed before and drove north, toward the restricted sector, and Hong watched their lights disappear into the trees. Then he stood very still for a moment. Then he looked up at the building. I stepped back from the window fast. I don't know if he saw me. I don't know who those men were. I have never been able to find out. The next morning, day 5, I made a decision. I was leaving in 9 days. I had enough material for my assignment. The magazine didn't need anything from the northern sector. I was a photographer on a paid job, not an investigative journalist, and whatever was happening in that restricted area was most likely exactly what Hong said it was, a routine government survey. I made the rational decision. I kept my head down. That afternoon, I was working in the central sector, photographing a troop of southern yellow-cheeked gibbons in the canopy about 2 kilometers from the station, when I found the camera. It was a trail camera. The kind wildlife researchers use, a weatherproof housing mounted to a tree, triggered by motion, running on batteries. Completely standard equipment. I'd seen dozens of them in other parks. This one was facing in the wrong direction. Trail cameras face outward into the forest to capture wildlife. This one was mounted about chest height on a tree at the edge of a small clearing, and it was facing back toward the trail. Back toward the path that researchers and park visitors used. It was pointed directly at the area where humans walked. Someone was using wildlife camera equipment to monitor human activity. I looked at it for a long time. I looked around the clearing. There were 3 more. I counted them. 4 trail cameras, all mounted at approximately the same height, all facing the human use trail. Creating, if their fields of view overlapped correctly, a comprehensive monitoring corridor for anyone moving through this section of the park. There were no cameras facing the forest. None at all. Whatever this monitoring system was designed to watch, it wasn't wildlife. I photographed the cameras without touching them. I documented their positions, their heights, their orientations. Then I walked back to the station and I sat down with my journal and I wrote down everything I had observed since day 3. The missing sector on the map. Bao's reaction. Huang's prepared answers. The handwritten note on the boundary marker. The late-night meeting. The trail cameras facing the wrong way. I looked at what I'd written. One of these things in isolation meant nothing. 2 of them meant a minor inconsistency. All of them together meant something I wasn't sure I wanted to name. I thought about Dr. Nguyen Thi Lan, the biologist on extended research leave. I thought about that handwritten line. It knows you are standing here. I want to tell you about a conversation I had with Trung on day 6. The conversation I mentioned at the beginning. Because now you have the context, and now it means something different than it did when I opened with it. Trung was the oldest ranger at the station. 53. He'd grown up in Ben Phuc province. He had a quiet manner and a habit of sitting with his coffee and looking at the forest the way other people look at photographs of people they've lost. Like he was trying to hold on to something. I found him that morning at the northern boundary of the central sector, crouching over something in the undergrowth. When I approached, he straightened up and moved naturally to block my view of whatever he'd been looking at. Smooth. Practiced. Mr. Reeves, he said. You are early today. Good light, I said. I nodded at the ground behind him. What are you looking at? Animal track, he said. Can I see? A pause. Then he stepped aside. It was a track, pressed into the soft mud at the edge of a small drainage channel. Something with feet, something bipedal, based on the placement. Something large. I've photographed wildlife tracks professionally. I've documented sun bear prints, clouded leopard prints, somber deer, wild pig. I've seen wildlife tracks on 5 continents. I could not identify this track. It was roughly the size and general shape of a large human footprint. But the weight distribution was wrong. The pressure was heaviest at the outside of the heel and the ball of the foot, not along the inner arch the way human weight settles. The toe impressions were present but indistinct, not the clear individual toe marks you get from a human barefoot print, but a more unified front curve, like something with a partially webbed or fused forefoot. What made this? I asked. Sun bear, Trung said immediately. I looked at him. I've seen sun bear tracks. Sun bears are plantigrade. They walk on their heels, like humans. Their prints do look somewhat humanoid. But sun bear tracks show claw marks. 5 clear claw impressions ahead of the toe line. There were no claw marks here. I didn't say that. I took a photograph instead. Trump, I said, as casually as I could manage. How long have you worked in this park? 11 years. You ever work in the northern sector? He was quiet long enough that I counted 4 separate bird calls in the canopy above us. No, he said. Has anyone? From this station? That is a government research area. Right. The government researchers, do you interact with them? Do they come through the station? Sometimes. They have their own access. Their own access, I repeated. You mean a separate entrance? He looked at me then. And there was something in that look, not hostility, not fear exactly. More like a warning delivered through expression alone. The look a man gives you when he's standing at the edge of something he can't explain, and he's trying to tell you to step back without saying the words. Mr. Reeves, he said quietly, you have a good assignment. Good photographs. Good magazine. You will go home in, how many days? 8. 8 days. A beautiful country to see. The Siuchi tunnels. The Mekong Delta. Many good places. He picked up the canvas bag he'd set down beside the drainage channel. Stay in the south sector. Take your photographs. Go home to America. He started walking back toward the station. That's when I asked, what happens if someone goes in after dark? That's when he grabbed my wrist. They do not come back the same. That night I sat in my room and I did something I'd been building toward for 3 days. I emailed Dr. Nguyen Lan. I found a personal email address on an old conference proceedings document. She'd presented a paper at an ecology conference in 2021. It was a long shot. The address might be dead. She was on extended leave. She might be unreachable. She replied in 40 minutes. The reply was in English. Clear, grammatical, careful English. Mr. Reeves, I don't know how you found this address or what you are doing at Bajia Map. I need you to understand that I cannot discuss my research there. I cannot discuss anything related to the northern sector. I have signed legal documents to that effect. I am asking you, as clearly as I can, to complete your assignment and leave the park as scheduled. Do not go north of the boundary markers. Do not stay in the forest after dark under any circumstances. The rangers who told you to stay in the south sector are trying to protect you. They are not hiding something from you to be secretive. They are hiding something from you because the alternative is telling you something that will make you want to find out more, and finding out more is not safe. I am not able to say more than this. Please be careful. I read that email 4 times. Then I wrote back. Dr. Lan, what happened to you in the northern sector? What are they studying there? What made those tracks I found today? She didn't reply that night. She didn't reply the next day. 2 days later, when I tried to send another message, I got an auto-reply. This email address is no longer in service. Day 7. I went north. I want to be clear about my reasoning, because I don't want you to think I was being reckless or stupid. I want you to understand that I made a calculated decision based on everything I'd observed, and I made it in daylight, and I made it with a plan. The plan was simple: cross the boundary marker, walk north for approximately 1 kilometer, document anything I found, and return to the south sector well before sunset. I had my camera. I had my GPS. I had the emergency radio frequencies. I had bear spray and a machete, both of which I brought from home because I always bring them on jungle assignments. I was going to be in and out in 2 hours. The jungle changed almost immediately. I don't know how else to describe it. 50 meters past the boundary marker, something shifted. The quality of the light. The sound profile. Every jungle has a sound profile, a specific mix of bird calls, insect noise, the movement of wind through particular species of vegetation. The central sector of Bujia map had a specific and recognizable sound that I'd been living inside for 6 days. Past the boundary, it went quiet. Not completely quiet. Not the artificial silence you sometimes get right before a weather event. More like a selective quiet. Like something had curated the sound. The insect noise was there, I could hear it. But the birds were gone. No calls, no wing beats, no rustling in the canopy. In 6 days of jungle work I'd been surrounded constantly by birds. There were no birds. I marked my entry point on GPS and kept moving north. At roughly 300 meters past the boundary, I found the first structure. It was small. Concrete. About the size and shape of a garden shed, maybe 4 meters by 4 meters, set on a poured foundation, with a corrugated metal roof that had partially rusted out. No windows. A single metal door, padlocked. A conduit running from the structure's exterior wall into the ground. A power conduit. This structure had, or had once had, electrical power. I photographed everything. I checked the door, solid. The padlock was a modern abloy, not the kind of cheap hardware store lock you put on a shed you don't care about. This was a serious lock on a serious door. The conduit running into the ground was in good condition. Not rusted. Relatively recent. I looked at the cleared area around the structure. A ring of cut vegetation, maybe 5 meters in radius. Someone had maintained this clearing recently enough that the regrowth was still short. This was not an abandoned structure. This was in active use. I kept going north. At 600 meters I found the second structure. Larger than the first. Same construction, poured concrete, corrugated roof, no windows. But this one had 2 doors and a ventilation grill mounted high on the exterior wall. Industrial ventilation. The kind you use when you need significant airflow into a sealed space. The ventilation grill was running. I could feel the air moving. Not strongly, a gentle, consistent exhale from inside the structure. And with it, barely perceptible, a smell. Antiseptic. Chemical. The specific smell of a laboratory or medical facility. There was a laboratory in this jungle. An active, powered, ventilated laboratory, hidden inside a restricted sector of a national park, with no public acknowledgement of its existence. I stood there for a long time trying to decide what to do. Then I heard the sound. I've been trying to describe this sound accurately for a week now, and I keep failing. Let me try again. It was not a vocalization in any way I recognized. It wasn't a bird call. It wasn't an insect sound. It wasn't anything a mammal I've ever encountered makes. It was low, very low, near the bottom of my comfortable hearing range. Almost more felt than heard. Like the sound had weight. Like it was pressing on my sternum from a direction I couldn't quite identify. And it was rhythmic. Slow. Patient. Like breathing. Not like the breathing of something small or fast. Like the breathing of something enormous and extremely calm. Something that did not feel any urgency. Because it didn't need to. I looked around the clearing. I couldn't see anything at the tree line. The undergrowth was dense enough that anything larger than a house cat could have been 6 feet away from me and invisible. The breathing, the sound continued. Steady. Unhurried. I made myself note the time. 14:37. I had a good 4 hours before dark. I needed to leave. I turned around and walked south at a controlled pace. Not running. Running is the wrong thing to do. Running triggers pursuit instincts in predatory animals, and it creates noise and it exhausts you. I walked south with my eyes moving and my ears open and that low, rhythmic sound gradually fading behind me. I crossed back over the boundary marker at 15:02. I walked back to the station. I sat down in my room. My hands were shaking. Not from fear, exactly, or not only from fear. From something else. From the specific cognitive dissonance of encountering something that doesn't fit any of your existing categories. From the feeling of a model of reality developing a crack. I had heard something in that jungle that I could not explain. And I had found evidence of a government facility actively operating in a supposedly routine conservation zone. I opened my laptop and I started searching. It took me 3 hours to find it. I'm going to tell you what I found, and I want you to hear it exactly as I did, because the order in which you learn things matters. The first thing I found was a Ministry of National Defense document from 2008. It was in Vietnamese, heavily formatted in government bureaucratic language, and my translation was imperfect, but the key phrase I managed to extract referenced ongoing environmental survey operations in Ben Phuc Province in coordination with Ministry of Natural Resources and COCC 7. COCC 7. I'd never heard of it. I searched COCC 7 in English. Nothing useful. In Vietnamese. A few results, all in dense bureaucratic language, most of which I couldn't accurately translate. But one of them, a footnote in an academic paper about Vietnamese forest policy, described COCC 7 as a special coordinating office under the Ministry of Science and Technology, established 1996, purpose unspecified. Established 1996. The Vietnam War ended in 1975. The American military had fully withdrawn. But the war had left things behind. Agent Orange. Unexploded ordnance. And according to some accounts I'd read while prepping for this trip, various reports of soldier testimony from both sides describing encounters in the Central Highlands jungle that didn't fit any known category of wartime experience. I'd filed those reports in the section of my brain labeled Folklore and Trauma Response. Combat stress does extraordinary things to perception and memory. I wasn't skeptical of the soldiers' experiences. I was skeptical of the literal interpretation. I was less skeptical now. The second thing I found was a blog post. Vietnamese, auto-translated, from 2019. A man describing a hiking trip into what I recognize from the geography as the northern sector of Bujia map. He described going in without knowing it was restricted, said the boundary markers weren't clearly visible from the direction he'd approached. He described finding animal tracks he couldn't identify. He described a sound. His description of the sound matched what I'd heard. Like something breathing that has all the time in the world. His post ended mid-sentence. The last partial sentence was, and then I realized that the trees directly in front of me were. The blog had not been updated since October 2019. The third thing I found was a name. A comment on an old Reddit thread from 2020, in a now deleted community called r/Vietnamese Paranormal. The thread was discussing unusual reports from the Central Highlands. One commenter, username deleted, wrote, "If you're asking about Bujia map specifically, you want to find a former U.S. Special Forces vet named Marcus Webb. He served in that region in 72 to 73. He has talked about what they found there. He doesn't do interviews anymore. Last I heard he was in Arizona." Marcus Webb. I searched. I found him. Retired. Living outside Flagstaff. A Facebook profile with public posts, most of them about his grandchildren and his vegetable garden. But there was a post from 2018, a single post, no comments, that he'd apparently made and then left standing, that said, "What we found in that jungle was real. They knew about it then, and they know about it now. I'm too old to carry this alone anymore. If anyone who was there wants to talk, you know where to find me." I sent him a Facebook message. Then I went to dinner. Then I came back and there was a reply. Marcus Webb was 74 years old. He called me on WhatsApp the next morning, day 8, from what sounded like an outdoor porch, birds in the background, the specific quiet of a rural morning. His voice was steady and dry and matter-of-fact in the way that men who've processed their trauma get. Not numb. Processed. "You're at the park right now," he said. It wasn't a question. "Yes." "In the south sector?" "Yes." "I went into the northern sector yesterday." Silence for a moment. "Did it hear you?" I thought about the sound I'd heard. The rhythmic breathing. The sense of something vast and patient orienting in my direction. "I think so," I said. "But you're back at the station. You're okay." "I'm okay." "Good." Another pause. "You went in during the day?" "Yes." "Then you're fine. What you need to understand, and I don't care if you believe me, I'm past caring about that, is that the daytime is almost safe. Emphasis on almost. At night the rules change." "What rules?" "The rules of everything," he said simply. He told me what his unit had encountered in 1972. I'm going to give you the condensed version, because he talked for almost 40 minutes and some of it is difficult to organize linearly, but these are the key things. In the summer of 1972, a 6-man Special Forces reconnaissance team was operating in the Central Highlands near the Cambodian border. Their mission was to observe NVA's supply line movement and call in airstrikes if necessary. Standard procedure. On their third night in the area, 2 of the 6 men disappeared. Not captured. Not killed. Disappeared. No shots fired. No sounds of struggle. 2 men were on watch at the perimeter, and in the morning they were simply gone. No tracks, no blood, no sign of any contact. The remaining 4 men, including Webb, reported to their handler. They were told to complete the mission and that the disappearances would be investigated after extraction. They completed the mission. During their final night before extraction, Webb says he heard a sound. "Like breathing," he said. "Like something enormous, just breathing." In the trees. He'd woken the others. They'd held their position. Nothing had come into the perimeter. At first light, he'd gone to investigate the sound's direction. He'd found tracks. "They looked like human tracks," he said. "Mostly. But the pressure distribution was wrong. And there were no toes. Not individual toes. Just a smooth front curve." I felt the back of my neck go cold. The track I'd photographed at the drainage channel. "What did you report?" I asked. "We reported the disappearances and the tracks. We were debriefed in Saigon. The debrief was not standard. 3 men in civilian clothing. No insignia. They were very interested in the tracks. Very interested in the sound. They asked the same questions multiple times in different sequences, the way you do when you're checking for consistency." "What did they tell you?" "They told us we'd been in a region where a significant predator had territory. Big cat, probably. The sounds, they said, were consistent with tiger or leopard vocalizations. The tracks were degraded by rain and ground movement. Our 2 missing men had probably been taken by the predator in the night." "And you believed them?" Long pause. I was 23 years old, and I was grateful to have an explanation. "Yes. For a long time, I believed them." "What changed?" "I found out what happened to Wilson." "Who was Wilson?" "One of the men who disappeared. Paul Wilson from Tulsa. I assumed he was dead. We all assumed they were both dead. You don't survive a predator attack in a jungle at night." He paused. "In 1989, I was at a VFW event in Phoenix. A man came up to me. He said his name was Wilson. Paul Wilson. I thought he was a relative, a son maybe. He was the right age. But it wasn't a relative, I said. No. Another long pause. It was him. It was Paul Wilson. He was 60 years old. He looked the same as when I'd last seen him in 1972. He looked exactly the same. Not aged well, not aged. The same. I said nothing. He knew details about our mission that could not have come from any document. Details I hadn't told anyone. He knew my radio call sign from that deployment. He knew what I'd been eating for the 3 days prior to the disappearance. He knew things only Paul Wilson could know. What did he say had happened to him? He said he didn't know. He said he'd woken up and been somewhere else. Inside something. And then he hadn't been. And then he was standing in the jungle in what he thought was the same night, and it was 1989. 17 years. 17 years. He'd lost 17 years. And he hadn't aged a day. I was writing as fast as I could. He was scared. Webb continued. Not of what had happened in the jungle. He'd processed that, or he thought he had. He was scared because 3 weeks before he found me, he'd seen the same men in civilian clothing. The men from the Saigon debrief. The ones who told us it was a predator. They were tracking him. They'd apparently been tracking him since 1989. He'd just figured it out. What happened to him after that? I don't know. He gave me a phone number. When I called it 2 weeks later, it was disconnected. I've been trying to find him for 35 years. I sat with all of that for a full hour after the call ended. Let me tell you what I believed and what I didn't believe, because I think intellectual honesty matters here. I believed Marcus Webb was telling me the truth about what he'd experienced, and what Paul Wilson had told him. I believed him because of his effect, the specific flatness of someone describing events they've lived with long enough that they no longer need the events to make sense, they just need to describe them accurately. I didn't know what to do with the content of what he'd described. A man not aging. 17 years disappearing. Government agents tracking a survivor through the following decades. I didn't know how any of that connected to the structure I'd found in the jungle. To the sound. To Dr. Land's panicked email. To the trail cameras pointing the wrong way. But the shape of it was forming. The outline of something. I had 8 days left in this country. I had 7 days left in this park. I made a decision I cannot fully justify. I decided to go back in at night. I know. I know. You're reading this thinking, this is how people die in horror movies. The man was warned. The man had evidence. The man had a credible source telling him the rules change at night. And he went in at night anyway. Let me explain my reasoning, and then you can judge me. Daytime entry had gotten me concrete evidence. The structures, the power conduit, the tracks, the sound, but it hadn't gotten me anything I could publish. Photographs of 2 concrete sheds in a jungle. A sound I couldn't record properly. Tracks that could, charitably, be misidentified. Nothing that would compel a magazine to change their story, or an editor to call for an investigation, or anyone in a position of institutional power to pay attention. I needed more. I also need to be honest about something else. I am a person who runs towards strange things rather than away from them. It's a character flaw and also the reason I have a career. I'd spent 6 days building toward this moment, and some part of me simply could not turn away from it. So, night 8. 21:30. I dressed in dark clothing. I had my camera with a night mode lens I use for nocturnal wildlife photography. I had my GPS, my radio on the emergency frequency, my phone with the translation app, a headlamp with a red filter, and my machete. I did not tell anyone at the station what I was doing. That was my worst decision. I want to acknowledge that clearly. I crossed the boundary marker at 21:47. The difference between the daytime jungle and the nighttime jungle is not what you expect. You expect darkness. You expect unfamiliar sounds. You expect your sensory load to redistribute toward hearing and away from sight. What I did not expect was the smell. It hit me at almost exactly the moment I crossed the boundary line, not at the marker itself, but 5 or 6 steps past it, as if there were a second, invisible border. A smell of deep water and something else. Something I associate with a hospital, that same antiseptic quality I'd detected near the structure, but much stronger now, and mixed with something organic. Something alive. I marked it. I kept moving. At 200 meters in, I found something I hadn't seen during the day. Lights. Not from the structures, at least, not directly. Diffuse light, barely visible, coming from somewhere deeper in the northern sector. The forest in that direction had a faint luminescence. Not bioluminescence, not the scattered points of a glowing fungus or firefly swarm. This was more uniform. Like light coming through fabric. Like something enormous was glowing underneath a layer of forest. I stopped. I checked my GPS coordinates. I checked my bearing. The light source, as best I could estimate, was approximately 600 meters north of my position. Past the second structure. I took 20 seconds to make a decision. I moved toward the light. At 400 meters I began to understand what I was hearing. The sound from the day before, that low, rhythmic breathing, was back. But it was different now. During the day it had been directional. Coming from a specific location in the tree line. Now it was everywhere. Surrounding me. Coming from all points at once, like the jungle itself was breathing. Like the sound was the background condition of this place at night, the way darkness is the background condition of a room with the lights off. I was shaking. I want to be clear about that. I was shaking and I was moving forward and I was functioning, but I was doing all of that while shaking. At 500 meters, I passed the second concrete structure. The ventilation grill was still running. The antiseptic smell was strong here. And there was light coming from underneath the door, real, electric light, the thin line of it visible at the base of the metal door. Someone was inside. I stood at that door for a long moment. Then I heard a voice. A woman's voice. Speaking in Vietnamese. Fast, quiet, clipped, the cadence of someone dictating notes, the way a researcher documents observations. I pressed my ear to the door. I caught fragments. My translation app was no help in real time. I needed to hear full phrases, not whispers through metal. But I caught two words that I recognized from my preparation research, sin vat, which means organism or creature, and a word I had to look up later, mao, which means specimen. Someone in that structure was documenting specimens. I stepped back from the door. I looked north, toward the light. And that's when I saw the figure at the tree line. It was standing still. Maybe 30 meters north of my position, at the edge of the clearing around the structure. At the boundary between the maintained clearing and the dense undergrowth beyond. It was human-shaped. Mostly. The proportions were slightly wrong. The limbs were the right length, broadly speaking, but the way they hung was not quite how human limbs hang, a slight excess of flexibility at the joint, a looseness that human musculature doesn't allow. The head was correct in size and positioning. The overall silhouette was close enough to human that if I'd seen it at a greater distance, in daylight, I might have mistaken it for a person standing at the edge of the trees. But I wasn't at a greater distance. And it wasn't daylight. I could not see its face. The light was wrong. The diffuse glow from the north made a kind of backlight, putting the figure's front in shadow. It was not moving. It was looking at me. I knew it was looking at me the way you know when someone in a room is looking at you without checking, a specific quality of directed attention that registers below conscious thought. I did not move. I don't know how long we stayed like that. My mind was doing several things at once, trying to categorize what I was seeing, trying to remember everything I knew about predator behavior, trying to locate the GPS in my hand, trying to remember how to breathe. Then it spoke. Not loudly. Not a shout or a sound of aggression. A quiet sound, conversational in register, directed at me. In English. It said, "You should not be here at night." The voice was wrong. The words were right, grammatically correct, inflected in roughly the right pattern for that sentence in English. But the voice was wrong in a way I cannot precisely describe. Slightly too even. The phonemes connected in a way that felt assembled rather than natural, the way a very good text-to-speech system sounds if you listen closely enough. I said nothing. It said, "The woman inside cannot help you." Then it turned and walked north into the undergrowth, and the light in the forest followed it, dimming as it moved deeper in, as if the luminescence was attached to it, or generated by it, or was it? The forest went dark. I stood in complete blackness for a moment. Then I turned on my headlamp. Then I did something I am still not sure was wise. I knocked on the door. The voice inside went silent. A long pause. Then, "Who is there?" In English. "My name is Daniel Reeves," I said. "I'm an American photographer staying at the ranger station. I'm not a threat. I need to talk to whoever is in there." A longer pause. The door opened. The woman on the other side of the door was in her late 30s or early 40s. She was Vietnamese. She was wearing a white lab coat over civilian clothing. Her face, in the harsh light of the laboratory interior, was the face of someone who had been subsisting on fear and caffeine for a significant period of time. She looked at me. She looked past me at the dark tree line. She grabbed my arm and pulled me inside and closed and relocked the door. "You need to leave," she said. "You need to leave right now. Before it comes back." "Who are you?" I asked. "My name is Lon," she said. "Nguyen Thi Lon. I wrote to you. I told you to leave the park." The biologist. Not on extended leave. Working, instead, in a locked laboratory in the middle of a restricted jungle in the middle of the night, surrounded by equipment that included 3 laptop computers, a bank of portable hard drives, a set of specimen containers I chose not to examine closely, and a wall covered in printed photographs and handwritten notes in Vietnamese connected by red string like the conspiracy boards you see in crime dramas. Except this wasn't a conspiracy board. It was a research timeline. "How long have you been here?" I asked. "In the park?" "Nearly 3 years. 3 years. I was meant to come for 6 months. A research contract with the ministry. Biodiversity survey, the same thing they tell everyone." She went back to the laptop she'd been working at, and her hands were shaking, but her mind was clearly still running because she kept typing while she talked. "What I found in the first month changed the nature of the work." "What did you find?" "Evidence of a species that should not exist." She turned and looked at me. "Not new to science," she said. "Not undiscovered. Something that should not exist because something like it cannot exist. Its biochemistry is inconsistent with every known evolutionary pathway. Its behavior is inconsistent with every known model of animal cognition. It is not an animal, Mr. Reeves. It is not anything in our existing categories." "What is it?" "Old," she said. "It's very, very old. I think it has been here longer than the forest. I think the forest grew around it." She pulled up an image on one of the laptops. A thermal imaging photograph. The kind taken with a specialized camera in low light or total dark conditions. It renders heat signatures as color gradients. In the image, the jungle showed the expected scattered warm signatures of small animals and insects. The ambient temperature gradient of living vegetation. And in the center of the image, moving north through the trees, was a heat signature that made no sense. It was cold. Not slightly cooler than ambient, not a cool-blooded reptile's muted signature. Cold. The image rendered it in deep blues and purples, the coldest section of the visible spectrum on the thermal scale. Moving through a tropical jungle at night, it was generating essentially no heat. But it was moving. Fast, purposeful movement. It had direction and intent. And it was large. The thermal scale on the image showed an object approximately 3 meters tall. "It doesn't produce heat," I said. "It produces something else." She pulled up a graph on the second laptop. Electromagnetic interference. Every time it moves through a section of forest, electronic equipment in the nearby area experiences anomalous behavior. The cameras malfunction. The GPS drops. The radio has interference on frequencies that nothing in this forest should be able to generate. The trail cameras in the central sector, I said. She looked at me sharply. The ones facing the human use trail. Those aren't facing the trail, she said slowly. Those are facing north. The direction it comes from. Someone mounted them low and backwards, aiming them back at the station approach, to create the impression they're monitoring human movement. What they're actually doing is watching for it moving south. Watching for it crossing the boundary. It crosses the boundary? The question hung in the air. She answered it by not answering it. How long have the Vietnamese government known about this? I asked. CUCC-7 has records going back to 1978, she said. But the Americans knew first. She pulled up the photograph on the wall, the center photograph, the one the red string converged on. It was old. Black and white. Military personnel, American, standing in jungle undergrowth. The photo was from the 1970s based on the equipment and uniforms. And at the edge of the frame, half obscured by vegetation, was a shape. A shape that was human-sized and wrong. They documented it during the war, she said. They called it by a designation. It's in the documents I've been able to access. They called it Tango 7 Actual. What does that mean? I don't know the origin of the designation. But the actual means it was confirmed. Confirmed presence. Not a rumor, not a misidentification, not a classification for an unknown animal. She turned back to me. Confirmed presence of something they did not have a category for. And after the war, they left it here. What could they do? They couldn't bring it with them. They couldn't destroy it. They couldn't communicate with it. They documented it, and they left it, and they made a quiet agreement with the government that came after. She laughed, and the laugh was exhausted and had no humor in it. Two governments on opposite sides of a war, sharing a secret, because some things are bigger than ideology. The structure, I said. What's it for? Monitoring. Containment of data. There's no physical containment possible. We tried in 2022. We lost 2 people. Her voice went flat when she said that. The specific flatness of something too painful to approach directly. The structures are for keeping the research safe. Keeping the data safe. If anything happens to me. She looked at the bank of hard drives. The data still exists. What data? Everything I've observed in 3 years. Behavior patterns. Movement ranges. Interaction incidents. Acoustic signatures. She paused. And the disappearances. I went very still. What disappearances? She pulled up a spreadsheet. It was long. Dates going back decades. Names, nationalities, locations within the park. The most recent entry was 9 months ago. These are people who entered the northern sector and didn't come back, she said. How many? She didn't answer immediately. How many? I asked again. In the documented record? 41. But the documented record only goes to 1978. And it only includes people the government knows about. 41 people. None of them died, I said. I didn't know why I said it. It just came out. She looked at me. What do you mean? I mean, they didn't die. The man I talked to. His unit mate came back 17 years later. Unchanged. Her expression shifted. Something clicked into place behind her eyes. You spoke to an American veteran. Webb. Marcus Webb. She was already typing the name. I've been looking for veteran testimonies. I have 6 documented accounts of soldiers reporting anomalous encounters in this area. If Webb has corroborating. She stopped typing. Mr. Reeves. This information is extremely significant. The pattern I've been building suggests that whatever Tango 7 Actual is, it doesn't kill. It keeps. The sound came through the door. The breathing sound. Close now. Very close. Right outside the structure. We both went silent. I watched the light under the door. For a long moment, nothing. Then a shadow passed across the light. Not walking past, stopping at the door. The shadow of 2 feet, human-shaped, standing just outside. The door handle moved. Just slightly. Testing. Then stopped. Silence. Then the voice, from outside, through the metal door, impossibly clear. You cannot stay inside forever. Not threatening. Conversational. Patient. Like something that had all the time in the world. We didn't speak for 5 minutes. We both just sat there, breathing, listening to the jungle outside go quiet again. Lan had her hands flat on the desk. She was staring at the door. After 5 minutes she said, very quietly, "It doesn't force entry. In 3 years, it has never forced entry. Why? I don't know. The best hypothesis I have is that entry into a contained space requires..." She paused. Invitation isn't the right word. Acquiescence. The door being open. It approaches. It tests. It waits. But it does not force. That's why the structures matter. Yes. Not physical barriers. Symbolic ones, apparently. She glanced at me. I know how that sounds. At this point it sounds like a data point. She almost smiled. What does it want? I asked. In 3 years, I've developed a hypothesis. She pulled up a document on the third laptop. Its behavior is not predatory in any normal sense. It doesn't hunt. It doesn't feed in any way I've been able to document. What it does is... She searched for a word. Collect. People. Consciousness, maybe. I don't know if it distinguishes between people and other forms of complex cognition. It has shown no interest in animals that I've documented. But humans who enter this sector at night, specifically at night, it approaches differently than during the day. It spoke to me tonight. It spoke English. Yes. No surprise in her voice. It speaks to me sometimes. In Vietnamese. Grammatically correct. Completely contextually appropriate. Where did it learn language? She looked at me for a long moment. From the people it's collected, she said softly. From 41 documented disappearances and God knows how many before. From soldiers who came in from the tree line in 1972. From hikers who crossed the boundary. It's been learning from the people it takes. The people it takes. Not kills. Takes. And Paul Wilson, 17 years later, looking exactly the same. They're still alive, I said. I believe so. Where? She shook her head. In it. With it. In whatever it is. Wherever it goes when it goes. She gestured north. Deeper. We sat with that. Then she said, You need to leave the park, Mr. Reeves. Tomorrow morning, before anything else. You need to take your photographs and go home. I need to take this story. There is no story, she said, not unkindly. You have a photographer's testimony and a scientist's testimony and no physical evidence that would survive scrutiny. The Vietnamese government will deny it, COCC 7 will disappear you into paperwork, and the park will close for ecological study for another decade. She looked at the wall of research. I have 3 years of data and I can barely get anyone to read a summary without invoking national security law at me. Then come with me. She shook her head. I have work to do. Lan. 3 years, she said. I've been here 3 years. I know more about this thing than any researcher who has ever studied it. There are 41 documented missing people inside whatever it is. Maybe more. I am not leaving until I understand what they're inside of. I looked at the hard drives. If something happens to you, then the data still exists. I told you. She pulled a small USB drive from a drawer and held it out to me. And now you have a copy. I took it. Leave before dawn, she said. And do not enter the northern sector again. Whatever you experienced when it spoke to you tonight, that's how it begins. The interest. Once it's interested in you specifically, the rules change. What rules? She looked at me steadily. The daytime rules. I left before dawn. I packed my equipment, wrote a note for the ranger station office that cited a family emergency, left it under Huang's door, and walked out to my rented car at 4:45 in the morning. The drive south was 2 hours. I didn't stop. I didn't look in the rearview mirror at the park getting smaller behind me, because I was afraid of what I'd see. Or what I'd feel. Because here's the thing I haven't said yet. The thing that has been keeping me awake in this hotel room for 4 days while I try to write this account clearly and accurately. When the figure spoke to me in the jungle, when it said, "You should not be here at night," I felt something. Not fear. Not exactly. Something more like recognition. Like something on the other side of a locked door pressing a hand against the wood. Not trying to come through. Just making contact. Just making sure you know it's there. And when I left the park, when I got in the car and drove south, I kept waiting for that feeling to fade. It hasn't. It's quieter in daylight. In this hotel room with the lights on and the door bolted and the city noise of Ho Chi Minh City outside my window, it's barely there at all. But it's there. A kind of low hum at the back of my awareness. Not threatening. Patient. The way a sound is still present in a room even after the source stops, resonating in the walls, fading slowly. Slowly. I have the USB drive. I've copied its contents to 3 separate cloud drives and 2 physical drives. I have my photographs. I have my notes. I have the transcript of my conversation with Marcus Webb, who I've tried to call 3 times since returning to the city and who has not answered. I have a flight home in 4 days. I've been told by a lawyer in Hanoi recommended by an American journalist friend that I am not currently under any legal restriction from publishing what I know. That could change. The lawyer was careful about how he said that. That could change. I've tried to reach Dr. Nguyen Thi Lan through every channel I have. Her university profile still says extended research leave. The email address she used to contact me is still dead. The ranger station, when I called, was answered by someone I didn't recognize who told me in careful English that all visiting researchers had recently completed their work and departed the park. I don't believe that. I don't believe she left. Here is what I know. There is something in the northern sector of Bujia Map National Park that has been there longer than recorded history. It is documented by the Vietnamese government under the designation of COCC-7, a unit of the Ministry of Science and Technology that officially has no defined purpose. It was documented by the United States military under the designation Tango 7 actual beginning at least as far back as 1972. It is the reason for the restricted sector, the trail cameras, the laboratory, and the very polite and very firm instruction from every ranger at that station to stay south. It is not an animal. It may not be a single entity. I don't know what it is. It collects people. It has collected at least 41 documented people over the past 5 decades, and possibly many more before that. Those people appear to still be alive, in some sense, inside whatever it is. One of them came back after 17 years, unchanged, with no memory of the intervening time. At night, it is more active, more present, and more interested in human beings than during the day. It speaks. It learns language from the people it takes. It does not force entry into enclosed spaces. It has been aware of me since I crossed the boundary line on day 7. Possibly since I stood at the boundary marker on day 4 and photographed the handwritten note on the boundary sign. It knows you are standing here. Maybe that wasn't a warning scrawled by a superstitious local. Maybe that was a property description. A factual statement about what happens when you stand at that particular threshold and look north. Here is what I don't know. I don't know what it wants with the people it takes. I don't know if Paul Wilson's account, 17 years inside, emerged unchanged, is a typical experience, or an anomaly. I don't know why it only crosses the boundary at night. I don't know why it doesn't force entry into structures. I don't know what the light in the deep forest is. I don't know what the antiseptic smell means. I don't know why it spoke to me in English when I haven't spoken to it at all. I don't know whether what I'm feeling right now, this low, patient hum at the back of my awareness, is a psychological response to trauma, to stress, to the specific cognitive distortion that comes from sustained exposure to something your brain cannot categorize. I don't know if it's something else. I don't know how far from the park it can reach. I fly home in 4 days. I'm going to publish this account and the USB drive contents as simultaneously as possible. Full upload, multiple platforms, shared with every journalist contact I have, the moment I land on American soil. Not because I think it will change anything immediately. Because Lon told me the data needed to exist outside the park, outside the reach of COCC 7, outside the jurisdiction of people who have spent 50 years and 2 governments' worth of resources making sure this story stays contained. Because 41 people are inside something in that jungle, and someone should be looking for them. Because Marcus Webb posted a message on his Facebook page 6 years ago saying he was too old to carry it alone, and nobody answered him, and that's not right. Because Trung grabbed my wrist at the edge of the tree line and looked at me with the eyes of a man standing at the edge of something he'd learned to live beside but never accept. And I think he deserves to have someone say out loud what he has spent 11 years not saying. Because at 2:17 this morning I woke up in this hotel room to the sound of breathing. Low and slow and patient. And the lights were off. I don't remember turning them off. I just checked the door. It's still bolted. The lights are back on. The breathing stopped when I got out of bed and turned on every light in the room. It just stopped. Like a recording ending? Like a phone call where the other party hangs up without saying anything. I'm going to sit here with the lights on until morning. I'm going to take my flight. I'm going to go home. And then I'm going to do something I probably should have thought through more carefully before I became interesting to whatever is in that jungle. I'm going to look for Paul Wilson. I think he's still out there. I think he's been out there for 35 years since Marcus Webb saw him in Phoenix, still not aging, still carrying something he can't put down, still watched by men without insignia who appear in his peripheral vision and disappear before he can confront them. I think he knows things about what's inside that jungle, about what those 41 people are experiencing, about what it is and what it wants, that no 3 years of field research could reveal. I think finding him is the next step. I think finding him might be the most dangerous thing I've ever decided to do. I think I'm going to do it anyway. Because the alternative is turning the lights off and pretending the breathing was nothing. And I'm not built that way. Neither, I suspect, are you.